The chandeliers above the ballroom glimmered like frozen stars. The air smelled of roses, champagne, and secrets, everything money could buy except sincerity. At the center of it all stood Annie Johnson, radiant in white satin, her skin glistening like onyx under the golden light. The veil trembled slightly as she breathed. Her smile practiced, her heart uncertain. Her mother's eyes met hers from the front row, proud, teary, unaware of the storm quietly forming behind Jason Miller's perfectly rehearsed grin. He was the son of a Manhattan tycoon, sharp jawline, blue eyes cold as the skyline, and a confidence that made people believe he owned the world. To Annie, he once represented safety. Now, as the priest spoke the words, "Do you take this man?" something inside her twisted. Jason's grip on her hand felt rigid, almost trembling. The cameras zoomed in. The live stream had already gathered over 100,000 viewers. The perfect wedding, people called it. A union of wealth and beauty, of white roses and black elegance. But perfection has a habit of cracking right when everyone is watching. Jason's jaw tightened. He didn't say "I do." He just stared at her, as though seeing her for the first time and hating what he saw. "Jason," she whispered, confusion threading through her voice. He dropped her hand. The crowd gasped as his polished shoes echoed across the marble aisle. Then came the words that would haunt her. "I can't do this." He didn't look back. Not once. Annie froze. For a split second, she thought it was a cruel joke, a stunt, maybe even a test. The cameras kept rolling. Laughter rippled among the guests, soft at first, then sharper, slicing into her chest, like shards of glass. Her knees gave way. The hem of her gown ripped as she fell, ivory fabric blooming around her, like a broken flower. Somewhere, someone whispered, "Guess money doesn't buy loyalty." Another voice laughed. Maybe he finally came to his senses. Humiliation burned her skin. The world blurred through the film of tears she refused to let fall. Then, thunder. A crack of light split the glass dome above the ballroom. Rain began to fall softly at first, then mercilessly pouring down as if the heavens themselves pitied her. Her mother tried to reach her, but the reporters had already rushed forward. Flashes, questions. "Annie, how do you feel? Is this part of the show? Did Jason find someone else?" She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Each breath felt like drowning. The makeup ran down her cheeks, black rivers over porcelain white. Her trembling hands clutched the ruined veil like a lifeline. Then through the chaos, through the rain and noise, came a voice, low, calm, and steady. "He doesn't deserve you." The crowd turned. A man stood near the entrance, rain dripping from his dark hair sleeves, rolled-up tie, loosened as if he'd just come from a storm he didn't start, but was ready to end. Nathan Sterling. The name carried weight in every corner of Wall Street. Billionaire. Founder of Sterling Global. A man whose empire touched everything from tech to media to real estate. And 3 years ago, he had offered her a ring. She had said no, because she wanted a normal life, because she didn't want to be someone's charity case or accessory. Now the man she'd chosen over him had walked away, and the one she had left behind had just stepped forward. Annie blinked through the rain, her lips parting the memory of that night, rushing back the dinner overlooking the Hudson. Nathan's quiet proposal, his calm certainty when she told him she wasn't ready. He had simply nodded, kissed her hand, and said, "Then I'll wait, just not forever." Forever, it seemed, had arrived. The cameras followed him as he walked down the aisle, unbothered by the shocked whispers. Each step he took was deliberate, grounded like gravity itself, bowed to his resolve. He stopped right in front of her, Her dress-soaked mascara smeared, heart shattered, and extended his hand. "Come on," he said softly. "You don't owe them a show." She hesitated. Her pride screamed, "No." Her heart whispered, "Please." When his fingers brushed hers, warmth spread through her veins, cutting through the cold. "I can't," she said, voice breaking. "Everyone's watching." "Let them," Nathan murmured. "You've bled enough for their entertainment." For a moment the world paused. The rain softened into a hush, and in that stillness, Annie saw the truth, not pity in his eyes, but something deeper. Recognition, respect, maybe even a love that had never really gone away. The crowd parted as he helped her stand. Someone shouted, "Who is he?" Another voice answered. Sterling the Billionaire. Gasps followed. Cameras clicked. Nathan ignored them all. He slipped off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. The scent of cedar and rain clung to her, oddly comforting. As he led her through the hall, Jason's mother hissed, "You're embarrassing yourself, Annie." Nathan turned briefly, his voice like ice. "No, she's surviving your son." The doors closed behind them. Outside, Manhattan glowed under the storm. The streets were slick lights reflected like melted gold. Inside the car, silence. Annie stared out the window, her reflection a stranger, eyes, hollow lips trembling. Finally, she whispered, "Why were you there?" Nathan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You sent me an invitation." Her brows knit. "I didn't." He gave a faint smile. "Your publicist did. I suppose she wanted a headline. I wasn't planning to come. Until I saw the forecast." "The forecast," she repeated, confused. He looked out at the rain. It said a storm was coming. The words lingered. Something about the way he said it, half metaphor, half prophecy, made her shiver. They drove in silence through the city. Streetlights flickered across his face, carving shadows that looked like memories. She realized he wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her the way a sculptor looks at a cracked statue, seeing not what was broken, but what could still be saved. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere dry," he said. Then after a pause, "And somewhere you can start over." She turned to face him fully, anger flickering between her exhaustion and shame. "Why do you care, Nathan? You don't even know who I am anymore." "I know exactly who you are," he said quietly. "You're the woman who once told me she wanted to build her own empire before joining someone else's." Her throat tightened. That was years ago. And yet he replied, "You're still standing after being publicly destroyed. That doesn't sound like a woman who's done building." He stopped the car in front of a sleek glass tower. The rain had softened to a drizzle. "Where are we?" she asked. "My place," he said simply. "It's not what you think. You need rest, Annie. The press will swarm your apartment. Stay here tonight. Leave in the morning if you want." She hesitated. The offer sounded safe and terrifying. "You don't owe me anything." Nathan added, his voice gentler now. "Just don't run from the people who actually show up when it rains." That sentence broke her, not because of its poetry, but because it was true. Hours later, she stood by the window of his penthouse, the city stretching endlessly beneath her. Her wedding dress lay folded across a chair, ghost white and useless. She sipped the tea he'd made, the warmth anchoring her to the present. Her phone buzzed with hundreds of messages. "Jason, please talk to me. Mom, come home." Unknown number. "We saw the video. Are you okay?" The last one came from an unlisted number. She knew it was Nathan's. Only 3 words. "Sleep. You're safe." She stared at them for a long time before finally putting the phone down. Outside, the rain stopped. The city exhaled. But Annie didn't feel relief. She felt the quiet before another storm, because she knew Jason, and Jason didn't lose gracefully. She touched the window pane, her reflection fractured by raindrops. Maybe this was what rebirth felt like. Not fire, but water. Not destruction, but washing away what no longer served you. And yet a single question echoed in her mind as she watched the storm clouds drift east over Manhattan. What if Nathan hadn't come? The thought made her chest tighten. Maybe she would have fallen deeper. Maybe she wouldn't have stood back up. Or maybe, just maybe, some part of her had always known that if the world ever fell apart, he would find her again. Behind her, the door clicked softly. Nathan's voice came from the hallway. Calm and quiet, Annie. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, you'll need strength. For what she asked, turning. He paused, meeting her gaze with that same steady, unreadable look. To take back what's yours. And just like that, the bride who had been left behind realized she hadn't lost everything. She'd just been handed the beginning of something far greater. Something that would burn brighter than any chandelier and cut deeper than any betrayal. The city was a blur of wet glass and fractured light. Rain lashed against the windshield as Nathan's car cut through the Manhattan night like a blade through silk. Beside him, Annie Johnson sat in silence, her wedding veil discarded on the back seat like a ghost that had nowhere left to haunt. The last thing she saw before leaving the chapel was Jason's silhouette, a dark smear in the glare of paparazzi flashes, vanishing into the rain. Now the world outside was smeared too, neon bleeding into watercolors, dissolving much like her certainty. The ring on her finger felt heavier with every passing mile. It mocked her. It shimmered with the kind of permanence love never truly promises. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it off. The diamond caught a flash of light, brief, defiant, before she let it fall. It hit the floor mat with a sound so small, she almost missed it. Then it rolled, and disappeared beneath the seat. Just like him. Just like the version of her that believed forever was a word worth trusting. Nathan didn't look at her, but she could feel his awareness quiet, steady, the kind that sees without intruding. His hands rested on the steering wheel, veins taut under the soft glow of the dashboard. Finally, she found her voice. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze stayed locked on the rain-smeared road, the rhythm of the wipers marking the silence between them. When he finally spoke, his tone was even almost too calm. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind." Annie turned to him, her brows knitting. "You..." "The man with everything." He gave a low, humorless laugh. Everything except what mattered. Something in the way he said it, that effortless ache, hidden beneath control, silenced her. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, echoing the pulse in her chest. For a long while, neither of them spoke again. The only sound was the storm, relentless and alive, as if the world itself refused to let her grief go quietly. When she woke, it was morning. Golden light filtered through sheer curtains, soft but merciless. The bed she lay on was impossibly large, the sheets crisp and unfamiliar. For a moment, panic clawed at her chest. Then she saw the folded suit jacket draped across her, the same one he'd wrapped around her shoulders. She pressed the fabric to her face. It smelled faintly of cedar rain and something steady. Safety, maybe. The memories of last night came back like shards of glass. The laughter, the cameras, the rain. Her humiliation had gone viral before dawn. Her phone, lying on the bedside table, was a battlefield, Hundreds of messages, notifications, headlines, screaming in all caps. Runaway. Groom billionaire steps in black bride, white savior scandal, or sympathy inside the luxury wedding that fell apart. Annie's throat tightened. The media had turned her heartbreak into entertainment. Again, she scrolled down the feed until she saw the clip, her on the floor dress, torn eyes vacant, rain pouring through the glass ceiling. And behind her, Nathan. His hand outstretched, his face unreadable, like a scene from a movie no one asked to star in. The comments burned, poor thing. She probably deserved it. Of course, a billionaire had to save her. Typical. Her breath caught. She tossed the phone aside, disgusted by both them and herself. The door opened behind her. Nathan stood there, dressed in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Morning," he said quietly. She sat up, pulling the blanket closer around her shoulders. "Morning. I didn't want to wake you," he said, placing the mug beside her. "You've had enough sleepless nights for one lifetime." "Thank you," she said, though her voice barely carried. He leaned against the window, watching the city below. "They're talking about you everywhere." "I know. Do you?" His tone was mild, but something sharp lived beneath it. "Because they're not just talking, they're rewriting your story. And if you don't speak soon, they'll decide what it means for you." She met his gaze, anger flickering beneath her exhaustion. "So, what, I'm supposed to hold a press conference? Apologize for being abandoned?" "No," he said simply. "You're supposed to reclaim your narrative before someone else owns it." Annie stared at him. "You talk like this is business." "It is," he said, voice low. "The business of surviving." She looked down at her hands, pale lines pressed into her skin where the ring used to be. "I don't even know who I am anymore," she admitted. "I thought love made me whole. Turns out, it just made me small." Nathan crossed the room, his movements deliberate, quiet. When he spoke again, it wasn't the CEO. It was the man who had once loved her enough to let her go. Sometimes God breaks you apart, so you can see who you were meant to be all along. She looked up sharply. The way he said it, not as comfort, but as truth, made her chest tighten. Her voice trembled. "You really believe that I don't know?" he said softly. "But it's what kept me alive when I lost everything." "What did you lose?" He hesitated. For the first time, his composure cracked. "My father, my company, the woman I loved." Annie's breath hitched. "Nathan?" He raised a hand. "Don't. You don't owe me the past. I'm just saying you're not alone in the wreckage." Silence filled the room again, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was human. Annie stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the skyline, the city she once loved, now a labyrinth of pitying eyes and headlines. The rain had stopped, but puddles shimmered on every rooftop like unhealed wounds. Down below, photographers were already gathering near the entrance. "They're waiting for me," she murmured. "They always will," Nathan replied. "That's what they do. Wait for someone else's pain to feed them." She turned to him. "And what do you do?" Nathan, wait for people to owe you something in return. His eyes met hers. Calm, unreadable, and yet burning with something unspoken. "No," he said. "I just don't walk away when everyone else does." The words hit her harder than she expected, because in that moment, she realized no one ever stayed when it mattered. Not Jason, not her friends who now ghosted her out of shame by association. Only Nathan, again. But she wasn't ready to need him, not yet. "I should go," she said, grabbing her purse from the nightstand. "You've done enough." He didn't stop her. "Where will you go home?" she said. He smiled faintly. "You really think you still have one?" Her hand froze on the door handle. He wasn't wrong. The apartment she'd shared with Jason was under his name. Her bank accounts were frozen after the scandal. Her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Her throat tightened. Then I'll figure it out. Nathan took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes steady on her. You're welcome to stay. 1 night, 2 if you need to breathe. Don't be kind to me, she said bitterly. It makes me wonder what you'll want in return. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Not everything has a price tag, Annie. Some things are just unfinished. She looked back at him, searching for irony, but found none. When she finally stepped out into the hallway, the sound of her heels echoed like fading memories. That night, Annie sat alone in the guest suite, unable to sleep. The city stretched endlessly, below a pulse of light and ambition. She opened her laptop, the glow reflecting in her eyes. For a moment, she hovered over the tab that said, Sterling Global Architecture Division. Her old dream stared back at her. She had once applied there years ago and never heard back. Now she knew why. Nathan had seen her resume, her designs, her ambition. He'd seen everything and quietly kept her out, maybe to protect her from what she'd become. She typed a message to him. Why didn't you hire me? Seconds later, her phone vibrated. Nathan, because you wanted to build something that was yours. Now you can. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, from the first flicker of purpose in months. Annie closed the laptop. Her reflection in the dark glass didn't look like a broken bride anymore. It looked like someone beginning to remember who she was. Outside, thunder murmured in the distance again. The storm wasn't over. Maybe it never would be. But maybe it wasn't meant to end. Maybe some storms didn't destroy. They revealed. She whispered to herself. Then let it rain. Across the city in his own room, Nathan stood by the window, watching the same clouds gather again. A faint smile crossed his face as he whispered the same words back into the night. Let it rain. Morning broke like a bruise, violet and gray over the skyline. The city looked innocent again, washed clean by the storm, but Annie knew better. Rain never erased. It only revealed what was already cracked. She had packed her things before Nathan woke. It was better that way. Fewer explanations, fewer debts. But when she reached for her phone, a notification flashed, urgent legal notice, ownership transfer. Her pulse quickened. She opened the email, scanning the lines until the words blurred. Subject: transfer of shares. AJ Studio Holdings. Effective immediately, all shares previously held under Annie Johnson are reassigned to Miller Holdings Group, per clause 17 to C partnership dissolution. She froze. Her studio, the company she'd built from the ground up, every sketch, every late-night pitch gone. Just like that. Transferred to Jason's mother. The betrayal burned colder than the rain ever had. Her mind reeled. She had founded AJ Studio with Jason 2 years ago, back when they were just lovers and dreamers. He had promised it would be our legacy. He had said he believed in her vision more than his own reflection. And now he had stolen it legally, quietly, completely. The door creaked behind her. Nathan leaned against the frame sleeves, rolled up coffee in hand, as if he'd sensed the shift in the air. You're leaving, he said simply. Annie didn't turn around. I was, but you're not anymore. She spun toward him, eyes sharp. Don't tell me what I'm doing. He held her gaze. Then tell me what just shattered you. The words cracked something open. She handed him the phone wordlessly. He read the email once. His expression didn't change. Only his jaw tightened slightly, a detail she would have missed if she hadn't been studying him so closely. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost too calm. He moved your shares to his mother's trust account. I know what he did, she snapped. What I don't know is how I let him. Her voice trembled equal parts rage and grief. I signed everything because I trusted him, because he said it was to protect us from outside investors. God, how stupid could I be? Nathan set the phone down. You weren't stupid. You were in love. That's the same thing, she said bitterly. He said nothing, just watched her pace the room like a storm trapped in glass. Finally, she stopped staring out the window. He took my company, Nathan. My name is gone from the registry, my designs, my contracts, everything. Nathan's reflection appeared beside hers in the glass. Calm, grounded. Then let's build something new, he said. She turned her laugh harsh. You think this is that simple? I don't need charity. His eyes met hers, steady, unflinching. This isn't charity. It's reclamation. The word hung between them. Reclamation. I'm not offering to save you, he continued. I'm offering you your fight back. Let me invest in what's next. Under your name, your terms. No one's signature but yours. Her throat tightened. Why would you do that? Because watching you lose yourself is harder than watching you leave me 3 years ago. Silence, the kind that presses on the chest until it hurts to breathe. Annie looked away first. You don't even know me anymore. Nathan smiled faintly. I never stopped. She hated how her pulse betrayed her quick, unsteady alive. Fine, she said finally. You want to invest? Then you'll be dealing with me as a partner, not a damsel. Good. He said, that quiet smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. I don't work well with damsels. That evening they met in his office, a sprawling space of glass, steel, and silence. The city pulsed below them like a heartbeat. Annie placed her sketches on the table, designs for urban housing that blended luxury with sustainability. Jason had called them too idealistic. Nathan called them visionary. He studied every line, every note, every fragile dream she had tucked between the pages. These aren't blueprints, he said. They're a manifesto. Annie raised an eyebrow. Is that a compliment? It's a declaration, he replied. You don't design buildings. You design second chances. The words caught her off guard. Second chances are expensive. Nathan's gaze softened. Good thing I'm rich. For the first time in weeks, she laughed genuinely, uncontrollably. It startled them both. But behind the ease, something darker stirred. Because while Nathan's offer sounded noble, it carried an unspoken risk: proximity. And proximity to him had always been dangerous, not for her safety, but for her heart. Over the next few weeks, AJ Studio was reborn under a new name, Annie Designs. The media called it a comeback. Jason called it theft. He sent her a message the day the news broke. You really think you can win without me? She didn't reply. But Nathan did. She already has. When Annie found out, she was furious. You can't fight my battles for me, she said, storming into his office. He looked up from his laptop unbothered. I didn't. I just reminded him who he lost. Stop defending me. Stop confusing help with pity. The tension between them thickened, sharp, electric. Annie turned away, her breath shaky. I can't be someone's project again. Nathan's voice softened. You're not a project. You're the reason I still believe building something real is possible. Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat time, fractured, the city lights flickering like camera flashes behind them. Something had shifted between them again, subtle but irreversible. Late one night, after another 14-hour workday, Annie wandered into the empty boardroom. The city glowed beneath her, but her reflection in the glass looked hollow. She whispered to herself, Why can't I feel like I'm winning? A voice answered behind her. Because winning doesn't feel like healing. She turned. Nathan stood there, sleeves rolled up tie, undone, the exhaustion of 1,000 board meetings in his eyes. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you." He stepped closer. "Jason's lawyers called me today." Her heart stuttered. "What? They're threatening to sue over intellectual property. He's claiming you used designs developed under the old company." She laughed bitterly. "Of course he is. He stole my work. Now he's suing me for using it." Nathan nodded. "He's desperate, which means we're close to something." "Close to what?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "The truth." Annie frowned. "What truth?" He met her eyes. "That Jason didn't build that company. He never had the capital to. The first major investor. The one who funded your prototype, your studio space, your first project. It wasn't him." Her pulse quickened. Then, who? Nathan looked out the window, jaw tight. "Me." The word hit her like a physical blow. "You?" He nodded once. "I didn't want you to know. You needed to believe you'd done it on your own. I told my finance team to stay anonymous. But Jason found out. That's why he pushed to merge. He wanted the control I never asked for." Annie stepped back, shaking her head. You funded my dream." "I believed in it," he said simply, "and in you." Tears pricked her eyes, not from gratitude, but fury. "Do you have any idea what that feels like? To find out the one thing I built for myself wasn't even mine?" "Annie?" "No." She cut him off, voice trembling. "I wanted to be enough. Not someone's charity, not someone's guilt, not someone's unfinished love story." Nathan's expression darkened, but his voice stayed calm. "You were never unfinished. You were waiting to start." She stared at him, breathing hard, torn between anger and something else, something that felt like the ache of recognition. He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "You can hate me for helping you, but I'll never apologize for believing you could build something worth saving." For a moment, the space between them pulsed with everything unsaid. Love, regret, defiance, longing. Then Annie whispered, "Get out." Nathan hesitated, eyes searching hers. "If I do, Jason wins." She met his gaze, tears trembling but unfallen. Maybe he already has. That night, Nathan left her office without another word. Annie stood alone in the dark, her reflection fractured in the glass. Outside, the storm gathered again, thunder crawling along the horizon. She closed her eyes and whispered to the empty room, "If he really believed in me, then he'll have to prove it." As lightning split the sky, a single message lit up her phone screen. "Jason Miller has filed an injunction against Annie Designs." She exhaled, a bitter, knowing smile on her lips. The war had begun. The city never slept, but sometimes it held its breath. From the top floor of Sterling Global, the skyline stretched like a sea of fractured stars. The office was all glass, and silence filled with the low hum of computers and the scent of coffee gone cold. Annie Johnson sat surrounded by blueprints, her blueprints, sketches of buildings shaped like hope, lines, measurements, ideas, the language of rebuilding. But tonight, none of it made sense. Numbers blurred, ink bled. Her fingers trembled as if her body remembered something her mind refused to fear. She had faced lawsuits, betrayal scandal. Yet somehow this, the act of beginning again, terrified her the most. Outside, rain brushed against the windows, like fingers on a drum. Nathan's voice broke the silence. "You're still here." She looked up. He stood by the door. Tie, loosened eyes, shadowed from another day, spent negotiating her survival. "Couldn't sleep," she murmured. He walked closer, his reflection sliding across the glass floor. "You've been here 3 nights in a row. Even the city gets tired, Annie." She exhaled a shaky laugh. "Then I'm worse than the city." He stopped beside her desk, glanced at the scattered papers. "You're redesigning the project again." "I had to," she said quickly. Jason's team submitted a counter-proposal. They're trying to claim the foundation design was his. "Let him try." His voice was low, calm, dangerous. "He doesn't understand the soul of your work. He can copy your lines, not your fire." The words lingered warm and steady. Annie leaned back in her chair, exhaustion tracing her face. "You make it sound easy." Nathan studied her for a moment. "It's not easy. It's inevitable." She smiled faintly, but her hands were still trembling. The mug beside her rattled against the glass desk. He noticed. "You're shaking." "It's nothing. Just adrenaline." He didn't buy it. Quietly, he stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder, light grounding. "Annie," he said, his voice softer. "Now you're not weak. You're just too strong in places no one deserved you to be." She froze. The sentence pierced through the armor she'd been carrying since that stormed wedding day. Her lips parted, but no sound came. For the first time in weeks, the silence between them wasn't cold. It was alive, fragile, trembling, intimate. Nathan's thumb brushed her shoulder once before he pulled back, almost as if he'd said too much. But Annie reached out, stopping him. "Don't," she whispered. "Not when it finally feels real." He turned eyes, searching hers. The tension between them was a thread stretched too thin. One more breath, and it would break. And then it did. The kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't neat or cinematic. It was raw, two people who had lost everything finding proof they were still alive. His hand cupped the back of her neck. Her fingers tangled in his shirt. The world outside the lawsuits, the rumors, the ghosts of betrayal dissolved into the rhythm of shared breath. When they finally parted, neither spoke. Words would have ruined it. The night hummed around them, full of things too fragile to name. By morning, the world had already found out. The news cycle had no mercy, especially for women who dared to rise twice. Headlines bloomed across every feed like wildfire. Fallen bride finds a new groom, love, or leverage. Annie Johnson's sudden alliance with billionaire Sterling. Is this revenge or romance? Annie stared at her phone, numb. Her assistant had sent 20 urgent messages. Sponsors wanted statements. Journalists demanded quotes. The comments were brutal. "She's using him. He's saving her for publicity. Guess heartbreak is good business." Her hands clenched around the screen. "They make it sound like I planned this." Nathan looked up from the newspaper, his calm unnerving. "They always do." "You don't get it," she said, pacing. "They're twisting everything again. I'm not some damsel you pulled out of pity. I never said you were." "Then why aren't you angry?" He folded the paper, leaned back. "Because if I start fighting every lie they print, I'll never have time to live the truth." She stared at him, disbelief simmering. "You can just ignore it." He gave a small, wry smile. "No, but I can choose who I bleed for." "And right now?" she asked. His eyes softened. "You." The simplicity of it stole her breath. But before she could respond, her phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. "Jason. Still think you're winning. Let's see how Sterling feels when he learns what you hid from him." The words sent a chill down her spine. What the hell is he talking about? Nathan frowned. "What message?" She hesitated, showing him the screen. His jaw tightened. "He's bluffing," Nathan said finally, "trying to get under your skin." But Annie wasn't sure. Jason's cruelty was unpredictable, and his reach was wide. "Nathan, what if he enough?" He interrupted gently but firmly. Let me handle him. No. She met his eyes defiant. I need to handle this. He already took my company, my name, my peace. He's not taking my voice too. Nathan watched her pride and worry warring in his expression. Then we handle it together, he said quietly. Whatever comes next. That evening, they stood side by side in a press conference. Bright lights. Too many cameras. Questions like bullets. Ms. Johnson, are you and Mr. Sterling in a relationship? Is this partnership emotional or strategic? Mr. Sterling, did you invest in Annie Designs? Because of personal motives, Nathan answered none of them. He simply rested a hand lightly at the small of her back, not possessive, not for show, but steady. When it was her turn, Annie raised her chin. This is not a scandal, she said, voice calm, but fierce. It's a resurrection. I built something once and it was stolen. Now I'm building again, and no, I won't apologize for who stands beside me. The room went silent. Cameras clicked like distant thunder. Nathan's gaze found hers, pride flickering in his eyes. Afterward, as they left through the back exit, he said softly, You didn't need me to defend you. She smiled faintly. You already did, just by standing there. They stepped out into the cool night. The city lights shimmered on wet pavement, 1,000 tiny fires reflected in puddles. You know they'll twist that speech too, Nathan said. I know. And you'll let them. She looked up at him, the streetlight turning her eyes into amber. No, I'll make them choke on it. He laughed quietly. There she is. Who the woman who doesn't wait for permission to fight? Annie smiled, a small dangerous curve of her lips. You lit the match. Now I'm keeping the fire. Later that night, when the city had gone to sleep and the headlines had cooled, Nathan stood by the window of his apartment, watching the reflection of her sleeping on his couch. Her face looked peaceful for once, her hand curled loosely around a pen. Even in rest, she was planning creating. He whispered to the glass more to himself than to her. She doesn't know it yet. But the world isn't ready for her kind of fire. His phone buzzed, a private message from an unknown source. A photograph appeared on screen, Jason standing with a man Nathan recognized, a government contractor with deep connections. Below it, a single line of text. You don't know who you're dealing with. Nathan's smile faded. For the first time, he looked afraid, not for himself, but for her. He closed his phone, turned toward the sleeping woman, and whispered, Then I'll learn. Outside, thunder rolled again. Not rain this time, something heavier closer. The fire had returned, but with it came the promise of a war. The sky over Manhattan was the color of steel, heavy, expectant, unforgiving. Inside Sterling Global's glass tower, Annie Johnson stood before a wall of screens showing news coverage, stock tickers, and her own face on half a dozen networks. Annie Johnson, icon or instigator, Sterling Global under fire. Personal ties questioned. Jason Miller responds, I built her success. Her reflection shimmered faintly over the chaos, poised, composed, but behind her calm exterior, anger coiled like a live wire. Jason was everywhere again. He had returned with a vengeance, his interviews slick and calculated, dripping with false charm. He called her a misguided woman, manipulated by Sterling. He claimed she was using trauma for publicity. And now he'd asked to meet, privately. The cafe was elegant, the kind of place they used to visit when life was simpler and love felt infinite. Jason was already seated when she arrived. Crisp suit, familiar smirk, a glass of whiskey half empty. Still punctual, he said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. Always admired that about you. Annie took her seat across from him, her face expressionless. Get to the point. He chuckled. No pleasantries. You've changed. Or maybe I finally stopped pretending you deserved them. Jason leaned back, the smirk faltering for a second before he regained his composure. Fine. Let's be blunt. You're in over your head, Annie. The media's turning investors are nervous, and soon your precious foundation will be nothing but ash. She didn't blink. If you're here to gloat, you wasted your time. Not gloat, he said smoothly. Negotiate. She frowned. Negotiate what? Your silence. The words hit the air like a cold slap. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Sell me back your credibility. Make a statement saying Sterling manipulated you into slandering me, into stealing company secrets. Do that, and I'll make this all disappear. Annie laughed softly, a sound with no humor in it. Disappear. You think reputation is a currency you can trade? Jason's smile hardened. Everything is currency. You taught me that. She met his gaze, steady and fearless. No, Jason. I taught you that people are worth more than contracts. You just never learned the difference. His hand tightened around his glass. Careful, Annie. You're talking like you have power. I do, she said simply. It's called truth. He slammed the glass down, the sound sharp against marble. Truth won't save you. You think Sterling can protect you forever? He's not your savior. He's a man with a brand to protect. When this gets ugly, and it will, he'll cut you loose to save himself. Annie's lips curved into a faint, cold smile. Then maybe you should have been the kind of man worth saving. Jason's jaw clenched. You can't win this. She stood smoothing her coat, her movements deliberate, regal. I already did. The moment I walked away. Then she leaned closer, her voice low enough that only he could hear. You can't diminish someone who learned how to stand after you broke her. And with that, she turned to leave. Jason rose abruptly, blocking her path. His voice cracked with fury. You think you're better than me? Before Annie could answer, another voice sliced through the tension. No, she just remembers who she is. Nathan Sterling stood at the entrance, tall, calm, terrifying in his quiet authority. 2 security men hovered behind him, but his gaze was fixed solely on Jason. Jason's composure shattered. You're behind this. The investigations, the leaks, the smear campaigns. Nathan walked forward slowly, eyes unreadable. No, Jason, you did that yourself. I just gave the truth a microphone. Jason's laugh was hollow. You think you can destroy me? Nathan's tone was steady, measured, the kind that carried more threat than shouting ever could. I don't destroy people, Jason. I expose them. You did the rest. Jason's fists trembled. You stole her. Nathan's gaze didn't waver. You can't steal what someone threw away. The room went still. Even the air seemed to recoil from the weight of that sentence. Jason's face twisted, a mask of rage and humiliation. You think you're untouchable, Sterling. Let's see what happens when I take your empire down with hers. Nathan stepped closer, so near their breaths mingled like smoke. His voice dropped to a lethal whisper. The difference between us is, you build empires out of lies. I build them out of people you underestimate. For a moment, Jason didn't move. His eyes darted between them. Nathan's calm, Annie's quiet defiance. Then he laughed bitterly, pushing past. We'll see how long your little fairy tale lasts. He left without looking back, the scent of whiskey and arrogance lingering like poison in the air. That night, the city buzzed with rumors. Jason Miller's company, Miller Holdings, was under federal investigation for fraud and embezzlement. Anonymous sources claimed whistleblowers had come forward exposing offshore accounts and falsified contracts. The story spread faster, than even Nathan anticipated. By dawn, Jason's face was plastered across every major outlet, not as the charming ex-fiancé, but as a man facing the collapse of his empire. In her office, Annie watched the news in silence. Her phone buzzed, non-stop reporters, partners, even her mother. But she ignored them all. Nathan stood behind her, his reflection beside hers in the glass. "He'll blame you," he said quietly. "I know. Do you regret it?" She turned to face him. "Do you?" His expression softened. "Not for a second." Annie looked out again at the skyline. The morning light caught her reflection, no longer fractured, but whole. "I thought revenge would feel better," she murmured. "It never does," Nathan replied. "Because revenge ends where healing should begin." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe I'm finally ready to start." For the first time in months, the tension in her shoulders eased. But just as the calm began to settle, Nathan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted from ease to something colder. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the screen. A single message glowed on the display. "Unknown. You shouldn't have crossed him. There are things you don't know about your friend." Below the message, a photo. A grainy shot of Nathan shaking hands with a man Annie didn't recognize. Older, powerful looking, the kind of man who owned politicians instead of voting for them. Her stomach tightened. Who is that? Nathan's jaw tensed. Someone from a long time ago. It's not what it looks like. "Then what is it?" she pressed, but his silence was answer enough. For the first time, she saw something in Nathan she hadn't before: fear. "Nathan," she whispered. "What are you not telling me?" He met her eyes, and for once, the unshakable CEO looked human, tired, uncertain, haunted. "Some debts," he said quietly, "don't disappear just because you pay them." That night, Annie sat alone in her apartment staring at the photo again. The man in it, whoever he was, didn't just look powerful. He looked dangerous. Nathan had secrets, and secrets had a way of burning everything they touched. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, echoes of a city that never learned to sleep. Annie whispered to the empty room, "If I'm going to survive this, I need the truth, all of it." As she turned off the light, thunder rolled faintly across the Hudson. The storm wasn't over. It was changing direction. The night was too quiet. New York slept beneath a sheet of fog, streetlights flickering like dying stars. In a warehouse on the edge of Brooklyn's industrial docks, silence pressed against metal walls, broken only by the slow drip of rainwater through a crack in the roof. Annie Johnson sat bound to a chair in the center of the room, wrists, raw lips, split, eyes steady. The ropes cut deep, but not deeper than what she'd already survived. Across from her, Jason Miller paced like a caged wolf. The last week had ruined him, his face hollowed by sleepless nights, his voice frayed with desperation. The empire he'd stolen was collapsing, his assets frozen, his name dragged through mud. He blamed one person. "You think you've won," he hissed, slamming a metal pipe onto the floor. "You and your billionaire savior. You humiliated me, Annie. You turned the world against me." She met his rage with silence. Jason leaned closer, the stench of whiskey and fury filling the air. "You were nothing before me. I made you." Annie's voice was calm, too calm. "You broke me." "That's not the same thing." He froze, startled by her tone. It wasn't defiance, it was liberation. "Look at you," she continued quietly. "All this power, all this noise, and you still need me to feel like someone." Jason's hand shot out, grabbing her chin. "Watch your mouth." But she didn't flinch. "You destroyed the woman who loved you, Jason. But the one sitting here now, she's the woman you can't break." His hand trembled. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Then he laughed, unhinged. You think courage will save you? Let's test that, shall we? He turned toward the shadows where two men stood, hired muscle, their faces hidden behind masks. If Sterling loves her, Jason said, his smile curdling, he'll come for her. And when he does, he dies for her. Hours passed. Rain thickened outside, drumming against the metal roof. The air reeked of gasoline and rust. Annie closed her eyes, listening the distant hum of traffic, the wind through broken glass. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed. She whispered to herself, he'll come. And then she heard it, the low growl of an engine tires screeching to a stop. Jason smirked. Right on cue. The door burst open, light flooding the room. Nathan Sterling stood there alone, drenched, unarmed. Jason clapped mockingly. The night arrives. No guards, no deals. Brave or stupid, I can't tell. Nathan stepped forward, slow and deliberate. His white shirt clung to his chest, rainwater pooling at his feet. You wanted me. I'm here. Let her go. Jason circled him like a vulture. What, no lawyers this time? No press release to spin the story? Nathan's gaze didn't waver. This isn't business. Jason's smile cracked. It's personal then. Nathan reached into his jacket pocket. The bodyguards tensed. Jason barked, don't move. But Nathan only pulled out a small black device, a digital recorder. He set it on the floor between them and pressed play. Jason's own voice filled the air, echoing back at him. Transfer the shares. No one will ever know. If she talks, we'll bury her. Jason's face went pale. Nathan's tone was ice. Every word you've said tonight is being transmitted live. Your men, your threats, all of it. Jason's breathing quickened. You think this ends with a recording? Nathan met his eyes calm and deadly. No, it ends when you realize you've already lost. For a moment, time stood still. Then Jason lunged. Nathan moved fast, but Jason's men were quicker. They grabbed Nathan, forcing him to his knees. Jason picked up the recorder and smashed it against the wall. Do you really think you scare me? Jason roared, his voice cracking. You're nothing without your empire. Annie's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as glass. Neither are you. Jason turned, just as she slammed her chair backward, splintering the wooden frame. The ropes tore against the jagged edges. In one motion, she freed her hands, blood streaking down her wrists. Nathan saw his chance. He surged forward, headbutting the man holding him. The fight was brief. Brutal fists, shouts, the echo of bodies hitting concrete. Jason stumbled back, reaching into his coat, the glint of metal catching light. Nathan, Annie shouted. But before Jason could raise the gun, red and blue lights exploded through the windows. Police sirens shouting officers, the sound of boots pounding pavement. Jason froze. His face twisted, torn between rage and disbelief. Nathan stood tall, chest heaving, blood on his lip, but eyes steady. Annie picked up the recorder's shattered remains, and from her pocket, she pulled another identical one. Jason's expression collapsed. You think I didn't learn from you? She said softly. Always have a backup. The officers swarmed in, guns drawn. Jason dropped the weapon, his hands trembling. As the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he looked at Annie, the same eyes that once promised forever, now hollow with defeat. I loved you, he whispered. I just wanted you to need me. Annie's voice didn't break. You wanted to own me. That's not love. Jason's gaze flicked to Nathan, bitterness bleeding through. And you? You think you're any different? You'll lose her too. The world always takes back what it gives. Nathan said nothing. He simply watched as the officers led Jason away. Just before he stepped through the door, Jason looked back one last time. Rain streamed through the broken roof, pooling at his feet. His voice was almost a whisper. That night in the rain, I should have known it'd wash me away. Then he was gone. Silence filled the warehouse, broken only by the rain. Annie swayed, exhaustion catching up. Nathan caught her before she fell, his arms wrapping around her like a promise. "You came," she murmured. "Always," he said, his voice rough. "I found the ring first." She looked up, and there it was, the wedding ring she'd thrown away months ago, glinting faintly in his palm. "You kept it," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I was waiting for the right storm." Her laugh was soft, wet with tears. "You and your metaphors." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You make them real." They stood there for a moment, two survivors beneath a leaking roof, surrounded by the debris of what once was. The darkness had come for them both, but somehow it hadn't won. Later that night, as police cars pulled away, Nathan and Annie sat in the back of an ambulance. The medic wrapped a bandage around her wrist, while another checked Nathan's bruised ribs. "You'll both be fine," the medic said. "Physically, at least." Annie met Nathan's eyes. "That's the easy part." He nodded. "The hard part is what comes after." She looked out at the rain again, softer now, more like a lullaby than a threat. "What happens to him?" she asked quietly. "Federal custody," Nathan replied. "Wire fraud, extortion, attempted kidnapping. He'll be gone a long time." Annie exhaled slowly, the weight of it settling in her bones. "It still doesn't feel like victory." "It's not," Nathan said gently. "It's closure, and sometimes that's enough." She leaned her head on his shoulder, the exhaustion finally breaking through the adrenaline. "Nathan, what were you really afraid of? When you saw that photo, the man you shook hands with?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "I thought I'd left that part of my past behind. But it's coming back, and it won't stop with Jason." She turned to him, eyes steady. "Then we'll face it. Together." He smiled faintly. "You sound like the woman who told her captor he couldn't break her." She smiled back. That's because she finally believed it. Outside, dawn began to creep over the horizon, gray, hesitant, beautiful. The storm was passing. But as Nathan's phone buzzed again, a new message appeared on the screen. "Unknown. You may have won this battle, but war doesn't end in the light." Nathan's face hardened. He pocketed the phone, looking toward the horizon. Annie saw the change in his eyes, a shadow stirring beneath the calm. "What is it?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then whispered, "The past. It's coming for us." The courtroom was cold, all marble and silence. Outside, rain whispered against the windows, gentle now, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Jason Miller stood before the judge. His suit wrinkled, his hands trembling. His once charming smile was gone, replaced by the hollow stare of a man who had run out of masks. The gavel fell. 20 years in federal prison. The words rang through the room like a verdict on more than just his crimes, on every lie, every wound, every illusion that had brought them all to this point. Jason didn't flinch, but behind him, his mother, small, frail, grief-stricken, began to sob, her voice echoing through the chamber. Annie Johnson sat still in the front row. Her hands were clasped tightly together, but her face was calm, unshaken. She didn't look at Jason as the guards led him away. There was nothing left to see. Next to her, Nathan Sterling reached for her hand. His palm was warm, grounding. "You don't need to win against him," he said quietly. "You just needed to win against the woman who thought she couldn't." Annie exhaled, slow, steady, and for the first time in years, she felt something close to peace. 2 months later, The world began to turn again. The headlines faded. The scars became stories, and the stories became lessons. Annie stood before a small crowd in an art gallery in Soho, her voice steady as she unveiled the name of her new company. Rising Rain Designs. The logo shimmered on the glass wall behind her, a single droplet, turning into a rising wave. She smiled faintly. "The rain used to remind me of loss," she said into the microphone. "Now it reminds me that everything broken can still grow." The audience erupted in quiet applause. Cameras flashed, but this time, they didn't feel like weapons. Nathan watched from the back of the room. He wasn't on stage, wasn't at the center of the spotlight. He didn't need to be. He had built empires and shattered competitors. But watching Annie rebuild her world from ashes, that somehow felt like victory. When the event ended, she found him leaning against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, that familiar half-smile playing on his lips. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I didn't." He replied, "I wanted to." She studied him, eyes softening. "You've been quieter lately." He hesitated before answering. "There are parts of me I've been trying to make peace with. You've just reminded me that peace is possible." Annie tilted her head. "And have you found it?" "Not yet," he said honestly. "But you make it feel closer." She smiled, that quiet, knowing smile that had once undone him completely. "Then we're both learning to breathe again." Weeks turned into months. Rising Rain Designs flourished. Annie's designs, architectural works blending sustainability and emotion, began to capture international attention. Her first project, the Glass Sanctuary, was built on the very lot where her old company once stood. Reporters loved the symbolism. But for her, it wasn't symbolism, it was resurrection. Every morning she arrived at the construction site before sunrise, watching as steel skeletons turned into walls and walls into hope. The city she once feared now carried her fingerprints. And Nathan, he was there, but never in the way that overshadowed her. He didn't dictate. He didn't command. He simply stood beside her, offering advice. When she asked, silence. When she needed space. Some nights he'd bring her coffee at midnight, staying in the background while she drew until dawn. One night, as they stood on the half-finished terrace overlooking the glittering city, she turned to him and said quietly, "You don't need to save me anymore." He looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe I never did. Maybe I just needed to be where you remembered you could fly." The wind lifted her hair, carrying the scent of rain and steel. She whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me, even when I didn't." He reached out, brushing a raindrop from her cheek. "You always saw yourself, Annie. You just needed to stop apologizing for shining." Their eyes met, and in that fragile silence, not quite love, not yet something deeper formed. Months later, Annie sat in a sunlit studio facing a journalist for an interview that would appear in Architectural Digest. The room smelled of rain and fresh paint. Her sketches lined the walls. Bridges, schools, shelters, places meant for healing. The reporter smiled. "You've been called a phoenix of design." "What does that feel like?" Annie laughed softly. "Painful, mostly." "Painful?" She nodded. People romanticize survival, but they forget it costs something. You don't rise without burning first. The reporter hesitated, then asked, "If you could tell the world one thing about starting over, what would it be?" Annie looked out the window. Rain had begun to fall, soft, unhurried, like a heartbeat. "People say the rain makes us weak," she said quietly, "but I think it does the opposite. It washes away the versions of us that we're too afraid to live. It gives us permission to be born again." When the interview ended, Nathan was waiting outside, leaning against his car. "How was it?" he asked. "She cried," Annie said with a grin. "Journalists don't usually do that." "Maybe she needed to hear what you said. Maybe we all do," Annie murmured. He opened the car door for her. "Where to home?" she said, smiling. "For once, that word doesn't scare me." That evening, they walked along the Brooklyn waterfront. No cameras, no storms. Just the slow rhythm of waves against the docks. "You ever wonder?" Annie asked why we had to go through all that. Nathan's eyes followed the horizon. "Because if it hadn't rained that night, I wouldn't have found you." She smiled. Always the poet. Always the realist, he countered. Rain doesn't ruin things. It reveals what's strong enough to stay standing. They stopped near the railing. The city lights shimmered on the water, golden and alive. Annie looked at him, really looked, and for the first time saw not the billionaire, not the man who had saved her, but the one who had quietly chosen to stay. "Nathan," she whispered, "I think I'm ready to build something new." He turned to her, half smiling. "Professionally or personally?" She didn't answer, just took his hand, fingers interlacing. For a long time, they stood there, two silhouettes against a city, reborn from storms. But later that night, when the world had gone still, and Annie had fallen asleep, Nathan sat awake by the window of her apartment. The rain had stopped. The city was quiet. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed, stamped with a foreign insignia. He had received it weeks ago, the day Jason was sentenced. He hadn't told Annie. The letter was short. One line typed on official paper. "We know what you did for the Sterlings in 2008. It's time to pay your debt." Nathan's jaw tightened. He folded the letter carefully, slid it back into his coat, and glanced at the woman sleeping peacefully on the couch. For the first time in years, he was afraid not for himself, but for her. Because he knew what was coming. And this time, it wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about redemption. The first snow of winter fell quietly over Manhattan Light, hesitant, almost shy. Inside the Sterling penthouse, the city's chaos felt far away. The fireplace hummed softly. Jazz drifted through the air. Annie sat curled up on the couch, sketching in her notebook. Her lines were softer now, her designs more fluid, bridges, gardens, open spaces, places meant for peace. Nathan watched her from across the room, a mug of coffee in his hand. He had seen her like this 100 times, completely absorbed, the world falling away around her. But tonight, something in his chest felt heavier. The letter in his coat pocket hadn't stopped whispering. "Something's on your mind," Annie said suddenly, not looking up. He blinked, caught off guard. "What makes you say that?" "You're staring like you're trying to memorize me," she said, half smiling. "You only do that when you're about to disappear." Nathan set his mug down, crossing the room. "You make it sound like I'm a magician." "More like an escape artist," she replied. He sat beside her, watching her pencil dance across the page. "What are you drawing?" He tilted the sketchbook toward him. It was a design, a glass atrium with curved beams that rose like open wings. "It's called Second Sky," she said softly. "A place where people who've lost everything can see light again." Nathan's throat tightened. "It's beautiful." She shrugged. "It's unfinished, like me." Their eyes met, and for a moment the world narrowed to the rhythm of two breaths, steady and fragile. Later that night, after she had fallen asleep, Nathan sat at the window, staring at the city lights below. The letter lay open on the table. "We know what you did for the Sterlings in 2008. You owe us. You have 1 month." He had spent years burying that part of his life. The deals, the offshore accounts, the silent favors, that had built the Sterling Empire's first fortune. His father had made the mess. Nathan had cleaned it up, but at a price that was never fully paid. Now the ghosts were back. He looked over at Annie asleep on the couch, her face softened by the glow of the fire. He had spent his life saving others, employees, shareholders' reputations. But with her, it was different. She didn't need saving. She needed truth. And that was the one thing he had never given her. Days passed. The world celebrated Rising Rain's first global project. Magazines called Annie the voice of a new generation. Investors lined up. Awards followed. She smiled for cameras, but every night when the applause faded, she found Nathan growing quieter. He still held her hand, still looked at her like she was the only person in the room. But there was distance, not cold, just waiting. One night, as they walked home through Central Park, Annie stopped. "Whatever you're carrying," she said, "I don't want you to protect me from it. Not this time." Nathan's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her everything, but he couldn't. Not yet. He brushed her cheek with his thumb. "When the time's right." Her eyes searched his. "I'm not afraid of your past, Nathan." He smiled faintly. "I wish I could say the same." A week later, Annie was in her studio when the phone rang. "Ms. Johnson." "This is Detective Ramos, NYPD. We're investigating a possible financial link between Sterling Global and an offshore firm. We'd like to ask a few questions." Her heart froze. By the time Nathan arrived that evening, she was waiting by the window, the news article open on her laptop. Sterling Global under federal review. Anonymous source claims. Hidden accounts. Tied to 2008 Sterling Fund. "Nathan," she said quietly, "tell me it isn't true." He didn't lie. He stepped closer, his voice steady but low. "It was my father's doing. I took the blame to protect the company. It was the only way to keep it from collapsing." Annie's eyes darkened. "And the letter? The calls from unknown numbers, they're connected, aren't they?" He hesitated. That was all the answer she needed. She turned away, gripping the edge of the desk. "You promised me transparency." "I know." "You promised me no more secrets." "I know." Then why her voice broke. "Why do you still think you have to fight alone?" Nathan took a step closer, then stopped. "Because what's coming could destroy everything we've built." Annie turned, tears brimming but defiant. "Then let it. I'd rather stand in the ruin than live in the lie." Silence fell sharp, heavy, final. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He wrote a single note, left it on her desk beside her sketchbook. "You taught me how to stand in the rain without fear. Now I need to walk through one last storm alone." By dawn, he was gone. 2 weeks later, Annie received a message from an unknown number. It contained only one line. "He's in Geneva." She closed her laptop, heart pounding. Everyone told her to stay away. Lawyers, investors, even her friends. But she had spent too many years running from storms to start again now. The next flight out of JFK was at midnight. Geneva was white with snow, its lake a mirror of frozen light. Annie found Nathan at a quiet cafe overlooking the water. He looked older somehow, not weaker, just worn. There were papers spread across the table, signed documents, and an envelope addressed to the authorities. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "You always find me," he said softly. "You make it easy," she replied. They sat in silence for a moment. The air between them was full of things unspoken: forgiveness, fear, love. Finally she asked, "What are you doing here?" He handed her a folder, ending it, once and for all. She flipped it open, records, transfers, statements, the proof of his family's crimes, the confession that would clear her and condemn him. "This will ruin you," she whispered. "It'll free us. he said. You can't build a life on shadows. Her hand trembled. And after this, I don't know, he said quietly. Maybe I disappear for a while. Maybe they'll need someone to blame, and I'll be the easiest target. Annie shook her head. You think redemption is about punishment. It's not. It's about what you do after you survive. He smiled sadly. That's your kind of faith. I'm still learning it. They looked at each other, and for the first time, there were no walls left, no pretense, no distance, just two people who had finally run out of lies. Annie reached across the table, taking his hand. If you go, I go. Nathan's eyes softened. You've already gone through enough storms for me. Then let's stop running from them, she said. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick, soft, endless. Hours later, the cafe lights dimmed as they walked out together into the quiet streets. Nathan stopped near the lake, looking up at the night sky. Do you believe people can ever truly start over? Annie smiled faintly. Only if they stop pretending they haven't changed. He nodded as if memorizing the words. Then he reached into his coat and handed her a small velvet box. Inside was the ring, the one she'd thrown away years ago, cleaned, restored, still bearing the faint scratch where it had hit the pavement. I don't know where life takes us from here, he said, his voice low. But this time, there's no ceremony, no audience, just the truth. Annie's eyes glistened. And what's that? That everything we've lost might finally mean something. She closed the box and held it against her chest. Then let's see what meaning feels like. The next morning, Nathan turned himself in. Annie watched from a distance as he stepped into the courthouse coat, buttoned head high. No press, no chaos, just quiet dignity. Later that day, she sat by the window of a hotel overlooking the lake, the same sketchbook open in her lap. She began to draw, not buildings this time, but faces. One of them was his. The world outside blurred into white. Somewhere deep inside her, something new began to stir. Not grief, not fear, but purpose. She whispered to herself, maybe the rain doesn't end. Maybe it just changes form. Her phone buzzed. A new message appeared. Unknown number, he kept one secret from you. Check the last page of the confession. Annie's hand froze. Slowly, she opened the folder Nathan had left behind. On the final page, beneath his signature, a handwritten line waited, the ink slightly smudged. The debt was never to them, Annie. It was to you. Her breath caught. Outside, the first ray of sunlight pierced through the storm clouds, painting the snow in gold. Annie closed her eyes, feeling the warmth reach her skin. The world had changed again, and somewhere between truth and forgiveness, another story was waiting to begin. The end.